Hello everyone, the Instant Camera Guy here, and welcome to what will be another video. This time, unboxing, diagnosing, and ideally repairing a classic Polaroid SX-70 Model 1. Now before I dive into that, I just wanted to thank anyone and everyone who watched my first uploaded YouTube video. I got a lot of good feedback. This channel, of course, is still in its infancy. For those that want content of mine that I've already produced, you can head over to my Facebook page where I've previously live streamed a whole bunch of repairs. So if you're really itching to get your fix, you can go over there. There's probably hundreds of videos there by this point. They are a lower quality because they were just streamed off of my phone. Everything that I'll be recording here is at least 1080p. But one of the changes that I will make as of this video is my hands will now be coming from the bottom of the screen. The reason that I recorded it the way that I did last time was just a byproduct of how the camera sits in front of me. It's got its little screen flipped up so that I can see everything that I'm doing. And that means that the footage is sort of upside down, but that's easy enough for me to correct in post. I had one person comment and say that it was nice to see my hands coming from the top because it was as if I was showing someone something. But then another person said with hands coming from the top, it felt nauseating. So I'm going to experiment with things and just see what you guys prefer. Yeah, just let me know because this channel is always going to be evolving. Obviously this is only the second video that I'm doing, so any tips that you want to give me, I will gladly take on board and review at this point in time. So let's get to the crux of things. If you're new here, generally what it is that I like to do is I like to repair clients' cameras and do so live. Everything that I repair here, unless it's something that I've personally picked up for myself, would have been sent to me by clients because this is what I do. I've been repairing professionally repairing Polaroid cameras for over a decade by this point. I think it's been about 13 years or so. And as of the last 3 years, really all I've been doing 7 days a week is fixing SX-70s. And around the pandemic, I decided to start streaming all of my repairs because I think people found them entertaining. I didn't necessarily start off with the intent on them being instructional videos per se, although certainly you could watch what it is that I'm doing and get a good idea of how to fix something yourself. But I wanted to emphasize before I dive in here and give a little warning that this is going to be a complex repair. I would not recommend you try this at home. I've put an asterisk there, with the asterisk being that if you have a lot of experience with small mechanical repairs and electrical repairs like, computer motherboards or home computers, Arduino, like lots of little DIY soldering projects, if you're very proficient at that and you have a very mechanical mind, then you may be able to pull some of this kind of stuff off. But I will just preface this entire series by saying, and you're probably going to hear me say this at every single video, these are incredibly complex little cameras. I've been repairing them for over a decade, and they still stump me every now and again. And a lot of what I'm going to do in terms of these repairs will make it look easy, and that's simply because I've done it hundreds of times before. Your mileage may vary in terms of what your problems are, but if you're the DIY-minded type, feel free to play along at home and treat this video as if I was Bob Ross or something like that. Just someone to listen along to and enjoy the joy of repairing cameras. So let's dive into this, shall we? One of the things I like to do when I repair stuff is repair it blind. So basically, you and I are going through this entire process together. So this one was sent to me by a client of mine named Cameron. Cameron lives in the same state that I do, so he's from West Australia too. And he picked up this SX-70 apparently quite cheap, but he was pretty bummed to find out that it was broken. So, oh, this is wonderful. Look at that. It's got its original box. Check that out. Wow, you really don't see the original packaging like that very often. That's really, really nice. So yeah, apparently story goes he was very happy to find that it was very nice cosmetically, but apparently when he went to open it up, oh, it's got the serial number, the service center. Wow, and this is interesting. Someone has circled the service center in Missouri, which suggests to me that maybe this has been repaired in the past. Dunno. Let's find out together, shall we? Yeah, apparently when he opened it up, the door came off or something like that. Yeah, the rollers are certainly... Yeah, here we go. Yeah, so that's what he found. So basically the door completely separated from its rollers. And so that was one of the first things that he sort of noticed, and he was a little bit bummed out because the rest of the camera didn't work, because the door is faulty. Now, one of the things he's actually given me is a complete new set of leather to reskin the camera in. Those are sitting below the bench, and I'll probably pull them out at some point. But certainly there are some signs that this camera has been, well, it's been certainly touched long before I got to it. One of the things that I'm noticing here, it's got the remains of what appears to have been some Dymo tape, which is that sort of embossed labeling tape. They've stuck it to the leather, and as a result, when it's been peeled off, it's taken a bunch of that leather with it. So whenever you do stick stickers to an SX-70, if you have to, I would always try and put it on the chrome surfaces, because you're not going to damage anything if you do that. Sticking something to the leather is basically guaranteed to ruin it, because when you peel that off, it's going to get damaged. One of the things that you can do if you want to check if your SX-70 has ever been repaired in the past is if you push up on the viewfinder blinds and then down, you can actually have a look on the mirror assembly here on that little curved surface and see if there's any pencil markings. This one doesn't appear to have any on there. It also doesn't have any other markings that I can see, obviously, other than a little bit of yellow paint, like a little yellow marker, which is up there near the closing latch. And that may indicate that it was a factory refurb that was then sold on. All little interesting tidbits that you find when you look at SX-70s. One of the other first things that I notice, and possibly the reason that the door is damaged, is this little guard here for the door switch is completely bent, and it's leaning off to the side, so I don't think this door switch is going to work properly. So the first thing that I'm going to do is just fix that. I'm just going to bend it back with some pliers so it's in the right shape. There we go. And now what I'm going to do is just using some tweezers, I'm going to bend that door switch down again. And yeah, hopefully it'll work a little bit better now. Now, I happened to know about that door being problematic, so I prepared earlier a spare door that I happen to have in stock. There we go, so the latch is all good. Let's put the blinds back up. And what I'm going to do is just test it with an empty pack of film, see what happens. All right, well, that's a promising sign so far. The camera does have signs of life. As you guys can hear from the motor that's inside here, sounds very, very sad. So that motor is very, very slow. At a very minimum, that motor will need to be refurbished. If refurbishing it proves fruitless, then I may end up replacing it. But yeah, certainly given that this original door, well, the chassis of the door at least, is in good shape, what I'm going to try and do is add some new rollers. You can actually see where they've tried to super glue the rollers back. This was quite a fairly common problem on early Model 1 cameras. And the thread that holds in these rollers just simply wasn't powerful enough, and the screws end up popping out, which causes the two halves to separate. Not super uncommon. It's not exactly the most common problem, but certainly something that I've seen many times, typically on a Model 1. So effectively what I'm going to do, I'm going to start to deskin this camera. I'm going to take all the bottom and top panels off. This bottom panel, since it's in pretty good condition, I may salvage, but the rest of it, since we're not going to use it, I'll be just throwing away because the client has supplied new leather. Generally, my preference is to salvage the original, but it does have a few dents and things, and since it's got that Dymo tape damage, this is one example where I would say, you know what, let's just reskin it. It's going to look a lot nicer. Now, as I take this thing apart, I really want to emphasize here just how important it is to service one of these things properly. As you guys can already see, technically I've already got this thing working, right? And all I had to do was bend a little switch, right? Now, if I was a less reputable repairman, I may be tempted to just say, there you go, fixed. That'll be $100, please. And it's, you know, very quick money for what is a very quick repair. But I'm better than that, and I want this thing to work properly, because the thing about an SX-70, and the thing that is really important to emphasize, and that you should know, is that these things, although they're an amazing, iconic piece of design, they're really fantastic cameras, they are really garbage in terms of reliability and design. I mean, these things were just woeful from day one, straight from the factory. And these days are basically guaranteed to be in need of servicing, and there's two reasons for that. The first is, as I was saying before, when these things left the factory, especially the Model 1 cameras, they had a plethora of issues that were due to basically the camera being rushed to the market. To cut a long story short, Polaroid spent the equivalent of like $1 billion researching and developing these cameras. And shareholders effectively forced Dr. Edwin Land to rush it to the markets. And they had all kinds of issues which, you know, just couldn't be foreseen at the time. So they had, for example, and this is just a few examples, for example, the electric eye on the Texas Instrument shutters, the infrared filter is prone to corrosion. You have things like that door that I just showed you where the threads aren't long enough and so the rollers tend to separate. There are issues, for example, which we're going to find soon. The motor is coupled to the gear train through use of a little brittle plastic coupler, and that always snaps. There's things like in the Fresnel assembly, the mirror baffle is cut in a way that it often sticks and causes lag. The motors tend to oxidize and end up sounding sad. See, it didn't even finish the cycle. That's how bad it is. So there's lots of things that really, regardless of this camera's condition, I mean, this is quite a nice cosmetic looking camera. Despite that, we're still going to need to open it up and really overhaul this thing from the ground up if it's going to be expected to work properly. Because right now, although it's kind of working, I can just about guarantee if you went to take a photo with this, your images are going to be completely overexposed. But yeah, that motor at the very least needs doing. So yeah, what I'm going to do is basically open this thing up and pretty much just go through every single step of what it takes to get one of these things working. I'm not just going to reskin it and call it a day, but what I will be doing is just opening it up. Hopefully we're going to find some interesting things in there, some things where I can highlight the various issues. And get it working. But yeah, so these early model cameras, like I was saying, I'll just quickly end my train of thought there. They were riddled with design flaws. As Polaroid kept releasing newer and newer versions, so for example, the Model 2, then the Alpha, then the Sonar, then the 680, they were constantly revising the SX-70 and constantly coming up with fixes for all the little bugs that they had. But sadly, Polaroid started to really focus on cost reduction in the later years of SX-70 production. So it seems that basically for every problem that they fixed, they introduced a whole new set of issues later down the line. So for example, later model cameras from the Alphas onwards, a lot of the parts are held together with rivets instead of screws. The silicon that holds the mirrors in is not a good quality. The PCBs, especially those that were made in Taiwan, quite often they have dodgy or dry solder. So there's lots of different things that can go wrong with an SX-70. And the moral of the story is, regardless of its condition, if you want to get one of these and expect it to work nicely, it must be refurbished. No ifs, ands, or buts. And if you would like me to refurbish your camera, you can always send it in to me. As I said before, I've got over a decade's experience at this point, and there really isn't anything that I can't fix on these. And if you do send it in, who knows, it may end up in one of my videos, especially if it's got something interesting going on. So I think what I'm going to do is pause the video right there. I'm going to lower the camera so you guys get a bit of a closer view, and we'll open it apart and take it apart together. All right, we're back. The camera is moved 2 inches closer to give a slightly tighter crop, so let's get to work. A reminder again, this is a complex repair. It's not necessarily something that you want to be trying at home unless you are quite good at fixing mechanical things, or just simply are willing to risk breaking the camera. Caveat emptor, if you end up bricking your camera by trying to copy something that I was doing, well, you can always send it to me to rectify. There's actually an old joke about mechanics encouraging people to do their own repair work first because it makes the job bigger and the mechanic ends up getting more money. But I say that only because I've seen a lot of people attempt DIY repairs only to break things or damage things further. So just be aware, although I might make a lot of this appear easy, they can be very tricky. So let's start just by taking this bottom leather panel off, because I do want to keep that. What I'm doing is using a heat gun to just soften up all the adhesive. Yeah, I don't mean to make myself out like I'm some kind of genius. I'm certainly not. These are incredibly complex little cameras, and I'm still learning to this day. I still find things out about these that I go, wow, it's just utterly amazing how complex and how radical these little things are. They're just so different to repairing anything else. Yeah, I say it mainly just because I've got a lot of experience with these. You might be tempted to track down an original copy of the repair manual. I really wouldn't bother. It is one of the least helpful documents you could ever want to own. The original repair documentation for an SX-70 pretty much assumes that you're in the factory with access to all of the factory materials and all of the factory calibration equipment. And unless you have all that, it's really not helpful. The other thing is that the official repair documentation, it actually doesn't document any of those bugs that I was talking about before, or the design flaws. Polaroid only sort of figured out that as they went. So the documentation in the repair manual, it doesn't really mention a lot of the issues that these cameras end up having anyway. It is handy for sort of figuring out the operation of things, but for the actual calibration side of things and the tools required and that kind of stuff, it's really just not very helpful. Also, a lot of the electronic diagnostic trees ultimately just end with, replace the PCB. Which is fine if you have access to brand new parts like the factory would have in 1974. But it's not helpful if you're trying to get one working that you've picked up cheap at a yard sale. So I do recommend, yeah, if you want to try the DIY route, like, you're better off honestly just watching my videos. You'll probably get more out of it than what the repair manual will show you. But yeah, I own a physical copy of it, and it's comically useless. It really is. And the only repair manual that's more useless than the original SX-70 repair manual is the SX-70 Sonar repair manual. Which is, yeah, just really, really woeful. Everything in the diagnostic tree. Replace. Just replace it. All right. I just wanted this as a spare because I can use that later to fix someone else's camera. Right. The rest of the leather pieces I can just remove really any way that I choose. The easiest way that I find to do it is to use needle nose pliers and roll. Obviously doing it this way really deforms the leather, so you won't be able to re-salvage it after that. But in this case, I'm happy to deskin this camera because of that damage. So I just want to start just by getting rid of all the leather bits. Get that out of the way. Come on. Oh, this one's really held on. There we go. It's a little example of just what a crazy company Polaroid was. Dr. Edwin Land was so insistent that his cameras be premium. And, you know, for a premium camera, you'd need a premium finish, such as leather. And he basically had to pioneer a way to produce leather on that larger scale and be able to stick it down, because leather, being a natural material, is notoriously hard to work with, especially if you're trying to come up with 5 panels that completely match. And they really struggled with finding a way to stick the leather down. So apparently, story goes, they just invented a type of double-sided tape. So all the adhesive that sticks these together, it's like a giant sheet of double-sided tape, basically. All right. Now, next thing that I'm going to do is just put a bit of penetrating oil on these 4 screws. This is really going to help them come out a lot easier. Interestingly enough, this screw down the bottom was not in properly. Like, it's already moving around. It's about to fall out as soon as I go to unscrew it, likely. Which is why it was lumpy under the bottom leather. It's like it never got screwed in all the way from the factory. If I didn't know any better, I've just got a little tray of parts. I'm going to put that in. If I didn't know any better, I would say that this camera was opened up at some stage and repaired, but it doesn't seem to have any other obvious signs of being opened up. I see a lot of people talk about like trying to cut screws out with a Dremel. Because sometimes the glue that holds them in can really just bond that screw to the body panel. If you use penetrating oil, it should never come to that. It's highly unusual for me to have to cut out a screw with a Dremel. The other thing that you can do, as I just did, is using a hot soldering iron, just burn the glue away. You're not going to damage the body panels because they're coated in metallic foil, which is very resistant to the solder, to the heat, basically. All right, so let's take this bottom panel off. Comes off pretty easy. Let's just put that over to the side there. And I'm just going to continue the inspection. So yeah, we've certainly got that original coupler for the motor. And I think that's where I'm going to start. I'm going to start by reconditioning the motor here. Now, one of the comments I was asked after the first video because motor reconditioning is something I do pretty much as standard on really just about every single SX-70 that comes my way. And Tony himself actually asked, he goes, oh, when you did that white and rainbow one-step camera, why didn't you recondition the motor? And the answer to that is, by the time the one-step was released, it was 1978, and they'd already moved on to using a better generation of DC motors, which just seems to be a lot more reliable. They're far less prone to developing issues, and it's highly unusual that you'll come across a Polaroid one-step SX-70 or a 600 or an Impulse or a Spectra or whatever it might be. It's very, very unusual for you to have one where the motor needs refurbishing. Now, what I'm going to do here, I've just put the rotor of that DC motor into my drill. And what I'm going to do, you'll note, I'll try and get the camera to zoom in here. Hello. But basically where that copper is, you'll note that dark colored scoring. So that's a buildup of carbon deposit and quite often a bit of oxidization that basically comes off the brushes in the DC motor. And what happens is over time, as that builds up on the copper, it stops really being able to get that electricity across and spin the motor. So what I found a few years ago is that if you put the rotor into a drill and use the drill as somewhat of a lathe, you can actually recondition it. Now, as far as I know, this was actually like a technique that I came up with. And I came up with it out of necessity because here where I live in Australia, there really just wasn't, off-the-shelf Polaroid SX-70 motors lying around. In the USA, you could get lucky, and there was a lot of, new old stock, dead stock motor supply lying around. Here in Australia, no such luck. Everything that I did over, the 10 or so years that I developed these repair skills, because I'm all self-taught. I never went to school for this. I just sort of figured all this out through reverse engineering over many, many years. And so I figured out that if you blast back and polish back the rotor on these motors, it's going to work again like brand new, most of the time. Now, sometimes you will get a brush which has a set of brushes on the DC motor which are just beyond salvaging, right? There's no hope for them. And in those cases, you really just do need to replace the motor. But a lot of the time, simply reconditioning it is going to give them years of life again. Yeah, see all the soot that's coming off there? So what I'm doing, I'm just spraying electrical contact cleaner onto a little cotton tip here. And I'm just cleaning the brushes on the end of the motor housing here. So this is already looking much better. So there's a lot less gunk coming off them. Now, by the time the SX-70 Alphas came around, they typically had better conditioned motors. Of course, they can still go bad. Alpha motors, the brushes were held in place with like little crimps. And every now and again, the factory that made the motors had a defective batch, and the brushes would just simply fall off the little metal legs that hold them on. All right. Now I'm just going to put the other side in. Hope you guys can see what I'm doing. This is where it can get very fiddly. All right, we're back on. And where did I put the drive shaft? Ah, here it is. I thought I put it in my parts tray. That is what it's there for after all. One of the things that I did, I took that little plastic coupler off and I've just thrown it away. We're not going to use it. What I'll be doing instead is stretching the spring. So basically putting a bend in the center of the spring. You don't need to like have this uniform stretch going all the way along. But what that's going to do, by doing so, I've lengthened that spring, and it's now going to connect to the gear train assembly without me needing to put that coupler back in. And what we should find is when I put this back together, the motor should sound very different to how it sounded before. Nearly there. Just giving me a bit of... There we go. All right. I'm going to lubricate the drive shaft as well, where it forms the metal gear. All right. Now let's get a pack of film, and I'm just going to push the door switch in. I won't put the door in. You guys hear the difference? Right? So sounds like it's had a completely new motor installed. It hasn't, that's the original motor, but what I've done is recondition it so that it now works again. All right. So now that that's out of the way, we can really start to focus on the rest of the body of the camera. I'm just doing a few simple little things while I've still got the camera together. The next thing that I'm going to do is just take my little tub of drill bits here, and I want to just drill out the rivets that hold in place the little metal tongue on the inside of the camera. Inside in the film compartment on an SX-70 is a little metal tongue, and what that tongue does is it prevents you from inserting like the wrong pack of film. So like if you put some I-type film in here, or like some original Polaroid 600 film from back in the day, that tongue physically won't let you insert it into the camera. But I am going to be converting this to take 600 film instead. And so it's going to be very, very convenient to not have your packs of film jamming. So I'm just going to remove that tongue completely. So slow is fine. I'm just going to get a sharper drill bit here. And I'm just taking my time. There's no need to rush. Here we go. All right, that should come out now. Yep, that's one, and that's two. And we just put those little rivet pieces to the side. So yeah, now there is no tongue. So any pack of film that we insert into this is now going to be really easy to do. So if this client ever wants to convert this camera to take I-type film in the future, totally possible. It's one less thing he's going to have to worry about. So with the tongue done and the motor refurbished, we can now work on stripping back the rest of this camera. Now cosmetically, I must say, this thing I would describe as being nearly perfect. It is one of the nicest cosmetic examples of an SX-70 I've seen in a very long time. So my client got particularly lucky there. Now you also might be wondering why I focused on the body of the camera first. The reason being, if you focus on the body of the camera first, it allows you to then test the shutter mechanism. Really, the body of the camera and the motor in particular if we compare this to like human anatomy, the motor of the camera is sort of like the heart, right? If that motor doesn't work, the gear train does not move and the camera will never be able to cycle to the point where you can even test the shutter. But if you get the motor working, we now have a much better understanding of what it is that we're looking at. So I'm just testing flash as well. And yeah, it's all looking really good. So this is really a camera where I'm not going to be doing so much repairing on it per se, but just a lot of preventative maintenance, such as what I've done to the motor already. All right, so I'm just going to keep stripping this thing down. I've got my little parts bin to the side that I'm just dumping all the screws into. And what I want to do next is really separate the shutter from the body of the camera, because we're going to keep stripping down the body of the camera. Here we go. So I'm just desoldering the shutter ribbon from the body. And this is one of those things where I feel like getting that little card again and just saying this is a complex repair, because the amount of people, I should say the amount of repair attempts I've seen in the past where whoever did the repair really needs to surrender their soldering iron is quite staggering. The amount of times I've seen this ribbon connector just melted into oblivion because the person's using an iron that's just way too hot. Soldering is a little bit of an art, but there's a lot of things that you can do to make it easier on yourself. I think a lot of people that really struggle with soldering are using just poor quality tools. So they've got, just a single 30-watt pencil stick, single setting soldering iron, which has, 2 settings, off and surface of the sun. And the tip that they're using is too big. And most importantly, they're using solder that they got at their local hardware store, which is basically just a roll of tin. I use proper audiophile quality Cardis solder. Now, for those wondering if that's overkill, the reason that I use this is I often do turntable repairs as a bit of a hobby on the side, and I like to repair old audio equipment as well. And being able to say to someone, oh, by the way, this turntable was resoldered using Cardis tone arm wire and Cardis solder, because the brand has such good recognition in the audiophile community, it's an instant bonus that people know what you're talking about. But the other thing is that this particular solder, it's a rosin core, it melts really, really well, and it is lead solder. So the main ingredient is lead, like they would have used in the 70s, and as a result, if you compare using this solder to something that you'd get at the hardware store, it just looks completely different. This solder will set completely shiny and chrome, and if the solder contains high levels of tin, it's not going to do that. It's going to set and be like a real cloudy, dull gray, like the inside of an aluminium can. What you want to see when you're soldering, especially on old electronics like this, is shiny little beads of solder. So yeah, just a little digression there, because I just think it's so important, because I think so many people, when they try and attempt a repair project, they're using just completely the wrong soldering equipment. All right. What should I do first? Should I do the shutter or should I do the body of the camera? I tell you what, let's do the body of the camera first, because I may very well need to get the silicone out and glue the mirror, and we can do that, and whilst that dries, I can work on the shutter. There we go. Now, Polaroid had a whole bunch of special tools designed specifically for taking these things apart and removing these little hinge pins. I just made my own. So I've just collected over the years so many perfect little tools for taking these things apart. As I was alluding to before, here in Australia, there really wasn't anywhere that I could just go pick up, you know, factory tools, custom made for the SX-70. A lot of this toolkit that I'm using, I had to make on my own. Just combine various different bits and screwdrivers together. All right, so I'm just taking off all the screws that hold the bellows in. Now, those two screws I just took out on an SX-70 Sonar and an SX-70 Alpha and like an SLR680, those are no longer screws, those are rivets. So you have to leave the bellows attached. On this, they're screwed in so I can replace them. All right. Now what I'm doing, I'm opening up the mirror box. That's going to allow me to inspect it, and there's a few things that we need to check. The hardest part of getting apart an SX-70 is these two rear clips for the bellows. Again, Polaroid had a special factory tool to do this. Basically, it looked like a pack of film with a handle on it, and what it will allow you to do is basically insert it into the film chamber, and you'd hit this thing and it would send up two spludges to undo those clips. You don't need it, obviously, as I just demonstrated, but what you do need to know is exactly where to poke it. So that's just something that I've learned from experience. Now, the Fresnel screen in here, really good condition. It's really beautiful. Same with the bellows. They're in really great shape. But the mirror is not. And this, ladies and gentlemen, this is why every single SX-70 must be properly overhauled if it's going to work. So these mirrors are held in place with 1, 2, 3 bits of silicon. And the rear 2 bits of silicon are very prone to failing. This is especially true on the SLR680. SX-70s, like the usual Model 1s, they're usually pretty good, but sometimes moisture gets under the silicon and they separate. This is very, very important though, because if all 3 blobs of that silicon fail, the mirror falls down inside the camera. And it's going to fall down onto the Fresnel screen. Now, if that mirror then gets a little crooked and you close the camera, you're going to shatter that mirror into a million pieces. And those little glass shards will scratch up this delicate Fresnel screen, and they'll very likely punch holes in the bellow as well. So we are going to need to remove that, and we are going to be re-gluing that back in for sure. Now, at the very least, you have to check the mirror. Sometimes it's fine. If you can give it a little pull like that and it ain't moving, it's not wiggling around, it's fine. It's nothing to worry about. But if it's flopping around like that, it is an absolute must to replace that. Otherwise, you are looking at a very expensive repair bill in the future because you're going to need to replace it. So, yeah, there you go. Absolute must-have if you want one of these SX-70s to last and to work. And this is just such a classic example that I see. And for a few reasons, like every now and again, I'll have a client contact me that just doesn't know this kind of stuff. And, you know, they're after a really cheap price on getting it serviced. And I'll say, look, I don't really do repairs per se. I do complete overhauls. Right? I rebuild these things from the ground up, doing a bare minimum of checks and tests, right? And they'll go, oh, yeah, but it's just the motor coupler, right? Like I watched a YouTube video and I know all about the drive shaft. It's just that. Can you just fix that? Well, if I'd done that, I would have missed that mirror, right? Which means it's just a ticking time bomb waiting for that mirror to fall down inside this poor guy's camera and smash. And then it's going to be an even bigger job. So I'm kind of glad that I found that in a way, because one of the things I really wanted to do in this video series, and what I've already been doing, I guess, on my live streams on Facebook, I really want to demonstrate just how much detail needs to go into fixing one of these cameras properly. Because I see so many people, like on Etsy and on eBay, you know, they've just got some old SX-70, they've reskinned it, and they're selling it as refurbished. And it makes me cringe to oblivion. I just hate seeing it, because people end up getting ripped off, right? They buy these cameras, they think that they're in working condition, and then they receive them and they're overexposing. Their mirrors are falling down, doors are falling off, all this kind of stuff, because people aren't doing proper servicing. So everything that I'm showing you guys is like really the bare minimum of what needs to be done just to consider one of these things refurbished. Now, I've just polished the end of this little dangly switch here. What that switch does, when you erect the camera, it basically pulls a little metal tab up and turns the camera on. So it powers up the camera, basically. It gets oxidized, so having it nice and polished just means the juices will flow a little bit better. But yeah, that's our bellows. I've taken the liberty of just cleaning them while everything is open here. And now I'm going to just get the mirror, clean this up too, and then of course we're going to silicone it back in. And you can see on this side of the mirror, this is the side where the glue attaches, just how hazy that is. And that's very likely why the mirror came off in the first place. So I'm just going to cut off the last bit of silicone there. And yeah, give it a clean. So I've just got my lens cleaner. Bit of glass cleaner, and just going to clean all that haze off. And get a nice smooth surface for the silicone to stick on. Now, what this does mean, this is going to be a two-part video now, because the silicone that I'm going to use takes about 24 hours to dry. And because I now edit my videos and put them on YouTube, that's actually fine. So I won't even need to do a part 2 video. I will literally just come back tomorrow and assemble everything. Heck, might even reskin it. But of course we can work on the shutter in the meantime. But yeah, that's looking nice and clean. What I'll do now is put some new silicone on here. Now the stuff that I use Permatex black automotive grade adhesive silicone. This is just the most awesome stuff ever. And it also has the advantage of drying completely light-proof, which makes it really good to use for bellows repair if you've had like a large format camera. So this is the box that it comes in. Adhesive black silicone. It smells really bad. You can get it in other brands, but be aware, if it's the type of silicone that smells like vinegar, it's going to be no good. Only this stuff is the stuff that's light-proof. So a lot of times on forums, large format forums, people will be like, oh, I've got pinholes in my bellows. How do I fix them? And a lot of people will recommend like liquid electrical tape. Please don't do that. That stuff is garbage. It dries completely hard, which means that it's no good for flexible bellows. It dries hard as iron. It'll fool you at first because it'll be very flexible, but over a few days it'll set completely hard and you'll ruin everything. Whereas Permatex black silicone, being silicone, dries completely flexible. And you can also turn this stuff into a paint by thinning it with shellite. Shellite is what we call like camping what's the word I'm looking for? Like camping fuel. Over in the USA, they call it naphtha, I believe. But yeah, what I'm doing when I reassemble this, I'm really going overboard with the silicon. And I'm putting it not just in the 3 corners where it was before, but also a good amount of it in the center as well. And what that's going to mean is, well, basically no single point can fail. It's going to be evenly spread throughout the whole bottom, and the mirror should never fall off again. That's the idea anyway. So let's just put the silicon back over to the side, put my adhesives back up there, and I'm just going to press this down. Now, in case you missed it, one of the things I had to do, I cut one of the guide lugs off so that I could swivel the mirror around. Silicon, if you try to pull the 2 halves apart, it's insanely strong. But silicon has a really weak rotational bond. So if you swivel the mirror, it'll break the silicon and you won't break the mirror. If you try and lift it up, it'll smash. Now, the 3 little plastic lugs that are in here are just simply there for the factory when they're gluing them in. They act as a guide. They do not need to exist. So sometimes the plastic lugs end up snapping off and falling off on their own, or just in the factory they aren't molded properly. So by cutting one, don't worry about it. It's not necessary. It's really just there as a guide. But what cutting that lug does is enables me to swivel the mirror off to the side. And that's it really. Now it's just the waiting game. Hello. So I'm going to put this over to the side in my cupboard, and then we can come back and work on this little guy. All right. Now this shutter works completely fine. The lens is also in very, very good shape. So I do not believe there's going to be any need for me to separate the lens elements here. I'll explain why that's important in just a second. But basically, an SX-70 lens, you've got 4 bits of glass. You've got the front bit that rotates and focuses. So you guys can see it coming in and out. You've got so that's got a single piece of glass in it, this front cell. And then behind that sits what they call the optical block, and that's 3 bits of glass. Now that optical block is what they call an open design. It's where the shutter blades travel through, and as a result there's got to be a gap on either side for those blades to be passing through. And that means that dust and fungus and stuff ends up getting in there. This one's very, very clean, so there's no need for me to open that. But if dust, debris, haze, for example, gets into that part of the optical block where the shutter blades go, the only way to access that and clean it in a model like this is you actually have to use a screwdriver and chisel and actually separate the 2 halves of the optical block completely separate from one another, and then you've got to re-glue it back together. Which is, it's annoying. But there's no other better way of doing it. It's not as annoying, however, as the Alpha, an SX-70 Sonar, and SLR680. They actually swapped from using a metallic lens cell to one that's made completely of plastic because, like I said, later model Polaroids, although they ironed out the bugs, they introduced a whole bunch of new ones in the form of cost reduction. And on those models, the only way to clean in between those layers of the lens is to actually cut the rear cell out. And you actually have to physically cut away the plastic from the glass, pop the lens cell out, clean it, put it back, and then you've actually got to use like an optical cement to put it back together. Very tedious to do. I actually much prefer to work on these shutters. I'm also going to put this in my cupboard as well. There's really not a lot I have to clean here. One of the things I will do though, I'm just going to show you that baffle, which is this shape here. So this piece of rubber. Can you guys see that? This little rubber piece? Now, the edges of this rubber are cut to right angles. And that's a bad thing because what can happen is those little bits of rubber, the camera can get hot, or sometimes this rubber's not glued on properly in the factory, and that rubber pushes up to these little plastic lugs. Let's see if I can show you. So there's these little plastic lugs here, and basically if the rubber and those lugs touch, the mirror is going to jam as it tries to come up. And that symptom, what that's going to appear to be like is you're going to go to take a photo, and the camera is just going to do nothing, and then after a few seconds, the mirror will then flip up and then it'll take the photo. Or the camera, you'll take a photo, it'll all lock up and you've got to kind of jiggle it and then it's going to work. So very easy to rectify. While the thing is open, I'm going to get a very sharp scalpel here, and I'm just going to cut away that right angle and make it a diagonal. And then we won't have to worry about that ever jamming. Again, this is just one of those things, whilst the camera is open, it's very important to do this kind of stuff to preserve the future of the camera. Because it's a failure point. It's not a matter of if, but when. And it's very easy to do while you've got it open, right? Later cameras like the SX-70 Alphas, 680s, etc., they had the angled cut already, so you don't need to worry about it. But yeah, I'm not going to clean any of that just yet. I might as well do that when I go to reassemble the camera, save it just getting dusty again anyway. So I'm just going to put this off to the side, and then we'll work on this shutter. All right, that's in the cupboard there. Now let's take this thing apart, shall we? First thing I'm going to do is just take the light dark wheel off. For some reason, Polaroid used flathead screws here. And I have no idea why. Everything else on this camera is like weird Torx head screws. For some reason, Polaroid decided, for the light dark wheel, yeah, screw it. We're just going to go flatheads. I don't know. I can't explain it. Who knows what was going in their minds. To take the housing off of this, I had to undo 2 screws. These screws are only found on the SX-70 Model 1. Later cameras, such as the Model 2 and the Alpha onwards, do not use those screws. They just simply deleted them because they're not necessary. That front panel is actually friction fit, so it's not necessary to have them. So I don't put them back. I always just throw them away because they're completely unnecessary. And it's nice to just have spare screws. So, sorry, I don't throw them away. I actually keep them to the side in case I happen to need small little screws. Now, inside the infinity post behind that focusing wheel is a tiny, and I mean tiny, little spring, about the size of a grain of basmati rice. Now this one is completely stuck in there, which is always fun. There we go. I can just about guarantee you, you can't even see it here, it's that small. I can guarantee you on one of these streams, I'm going to lose one of those springs. They are so small. It's literally smaller than a grain of rice, and it pushes a cylindrical metal pole upwards that connects to the focusing wheel and basically tells it where infinity is supposed to be. So small, so fiddly. I do have spares, and I can just about guarantee that in one of these videos that I do, I'm going to lose that little spring. It's just inevitable. You do not repair SX-70s as often as I do without losing that spring. Now, those of you watching might go, well, what if you got a magnetic parts organizer and then the magnet would hold the spring in place? Well, yes, you can do that, but then the spring will become magnetized, and that actually just makes it harder because it's very hard to get that spring off the magnetic parts tray. Also, some of the springs aren't magnetic. Polaroid used various different grades of the spring, as far as I'm aware, like some are like a brass color, some are gold, some are silver. And I believe that some are magnetic, but if you do that, then as you go to pull it from the parts tray, you're inevitably going to pull too hard and your fingers are going to compress and that spring's going to launch off into the stratosphere somewhere. So yeah, not a wise idea. I prefer to just kind of put it in a parts tray as far away from where my hands are working as possible. All right, so I'm just taking what they call the flash cam assembly out. So this is the little mechanism that is responsible for flash exposures. Now, when I was testing the camera before, just by eye at the closest distance, this camera did appear to be making all the correct shapes. So I don't believe that this flash cam needs to be adjusted, but I will just clean it with some electrical contact cleaner, just to make sure that this little spring-loaded mechanism is moving freely without any impedance. And then this is the other spring that always happens to go flying, and that's the little spring that attaches to it. I am just going to put it back together. There we go. All right. Now the lens can come out. And the next thing that we're going to work on is the shutter blades. Another very, very important and often overlooked step. In fact, I don't really know of many repair centers out there that do this regularly. And I've seen cameras come in from all the big, in brackets, repairers out there. And just about every single one of them has missed this. Which, okay, devil's advocate, technically it's not always a problem, but it's one of those things that can be a problem, and preemptively it's pretty easy to fix. So if you want to fix one of these things properly, I recommend you do it. But that's something called the anti-static layer. Now, I'm fishing the aperture blades out here. Another way that I could remove them is to remove the solenoid, but I don't like doing that. The reason being, the attachments for the solenoid to the PCB here are very flimsy, and they can snap. And they can also become kind of oxidized to the PCB and be very hard to desolder. I don't like putting up with the aggravation of that, and I certainly don't like having to rebuild a solenoid because I accidentally snapped a leg. So I prefer to just fish the aperture blades out this way instead. Just give myself a bit of light so I can see what I'm doing. That's one. Now this is technically not the, official repair manual way of doing it, but I do find that the slight fiddliness is well worth the effort. All right, let's put that heat gun away since it is very much in my view of the lamp here. All right, so we've got a bare solenoid, we've got our two shutter blades there. I'm going to clean these and remove the anti-static layer on this. Now, the anti-static layer is on the rear of the blades. Basically, it's on the parts of the blades that touch one another. And effectively, it's like a layer of paint. And I think the idea was to reduce static electricity and prevent the blades from sticking together due to static electricity. The downside, though, is that as that paint surface rubs, over time, it can start to flake off. And sometimes the paint can simply just oxidize, and that causes the blades to stick together, which is not a good thing at all. So what I'm going to do is get a jar, get some acetone, put these blades in here. Just a little bit is all you need. I'm going to give this a little bit of a shake. Now I have the windows open in here so that the room is getting ventilated. You definitely want to do that. This is particularly stinky stuff. All right. So, what I'm going to try and do here is show you on camera just how much paint comes off these blades. So that's why I've put down the little white piece of card so you can hopefully see it streaking. Now be very careful should you ever attempt this. Remember, acetone is very flammable. It also dissolves just about everything it touches. So do not let it touch any ABS plastic, or that ABS plastic will simply disappear. Yeah, the cloth is just going completely black. Now, devil's advocate, the painted layer on these blades was actually in pretty good shape. Oh yeah, can you guys see on the card how filthy it's become? So yeah, these blades were in pretty good shape. And so technically I could have got away with not doing this, but again, I don't like to do any of these SX-70 repairs without covering the very basic functioning, regardless of, you know, whether it needs it or not, because it would have needed it in the future at some stage. Might as well do it now if I've already got it opened up and in front of me, right? Like I said, I consider everything I do here in this particular video to be the absolute bare minimum of what should be required to properly refurbish a Polaroid SX-70. All right, now I'm just going to pour back the remainder of the acetone because it stinks and I don't really feel like huffing fumes and getting high because I've got cameras to fix and I ain't about that life. And now what I can do, I'm going to get rid of the acetone using some isopropyl alcohol and just a nice cloth. And again, it's just very gentle. And then I've got my secret sauce. Because you may have noticed, well, we just took off the sort of anti-friction layer, right? So what are we going to do about that? Does that mean these blades now have too much friction? Well, not really. You could just put them in as is. They're completely smooth. These blades are like made of I think a type of plastic. But they're completely smooth, so it won't affect operations. But I will add something that's going to be just as good. And it might seem like a ridiculous solution, but it's a really good solution. And what I'm going to do, I'm just setting up a bit of card here. I got a pencil being made of graphite, and graphite being a form of dry lubricant. And what I'm going to do is on the rear surface of the blades, which you'll never see, I'm going to color them in. And I'm going to color them in with a layer of pencil. And what this is going to do, this is going to act as sort of like a poor man's Teflon. But it'll just prevent those blades from sticking. So any microscopic indents and imperfections, the graphite is going to slide into. And this is very similar to what Polaroid later used on their Alpha and Sonar cameras. So Polaroid figured out pretty quick smart over a few years that, oh, that anti-static layer is just a really bad idea. So they actually started to use sort of like a waxy dry lube on their blades instead. I don't know exactly what it's made out of, but it's a very similar thing to what I'm doing here. Now, all of the graphite, I've never found that it ever rubs off the blades or anything like that. So if you're sitting there wondering like, oh, does that mean you're now going to get graphite all over the inside of the lens? No, I just smooth it off with my fingers so that there's no excess, and honestly it just doesn't, it never rubs off. All of my personal cameras are refurbished in this way too, and this is the best way I've found to ensure the blades don't stick together again. What you should never do is use any kind of liquid lubricant, because the surface tension of like oil, like let's say you use WD-40 or sewing machine oil, and the reason that I say use WD-40 is because I've seen it. I've seen people have an SX-70 with a sticky shutter, so they decide to fill the lens with WD-40. Don't do that. It's a very, very bad idea. But the surface tension of the liquid actually sticks the blades together, and it will permanently fuse them together until you physically go in, take the blades out, and separate them. All right. Now the last thing I'm going to do is just on the metallic entrance where those blades travel, I'm going to color that in with some pencil as well. Now, as I mentioned before, I'm not actually going to take this lens cell apart. I'm going to leave it completely intact because it is in fairly perfect condition, I would say. There's really going to be no advantage to opening this thing up other than, weakening the original bond that holds those two surfaces of the lens together. If it's just a few specks of dust, I mean like really, really tiny, I'll usually just contact the client, because it's one of those things, although it's technically possible to open up that lens cell, once you've done that, it's never quite the same. So it's really up to the client as to whether they want you to go that extra mile. Certainly if it was hazy or there was streaks of fungus, absolutely, 100% we'd have to open that up. Right. Next thing I'm going to do is flush the solenoid here with electrical contact cleaner and give it a bit of exercise. Basically just plunging the little electromagnet, and that just helps clear out any dust or anything that may have been present. And now we're going to put those blades back. So I'm going to insert one of them backwards to act as a guide, like so, and then I'm just going to feed that through. Get the blade back in. That's one side in. And now we can feed in the other side. Now I know some repairmen prefer to remove the solenoid, but like I said, I hate doing that. It's very fiddly. There's a high risk of breaking stuff, and I'd rather not take the risk. I, of course, can remove and replace solenoids. It is in my skill set, but if I don't have to, I prefer not to. Ta-da! Where's the camera? Here we go. So what we have now is one completely reconditioned shutter assembly. Okay, so now that the actual shutter blades are reconditioned, I'm going to pay attention to the PCB. I'm going to be cleaning the electric eye, and I'm going to be converting the camera to take 600 format film instead of SX-70 film. Reason that I would convert it to take 600 film is 600 film opens up the possibility to then later power the camera off 6 volts and use I-type film, but also 600 film, at least here in Australia, is just way easier to get. It's generally cheaper than SX-70 film, but most importantly, SX-70 film is 640 ISO. It's a lot faster than SX-70 film, and as a result, that means that the camera can be used in a lot lower light environments. So let's open this thing up and give that electric eye a good clean. So I'm just desoldering the little flash fire assembly from the PCB. That's going to allow me to lift up on the PCB and access the electric eye for cleaning. Now, there's an infrared filter on the electric eye on one of these SX-70s, and it tends to get corroded over time. It's just a chemical reaction that happens to the glass. And when that happens, the glass is going to go cloudy, and that means that the camera is going to think that it's a lot darker than it actually is, and it's going to open the shutter for longer and result in images being overexposed. So we want to try and correct that as much as possible. So for that reason, Polaroids tend to overexpose quite a lot. In fact, they're far more prone to overexposing than just being in working condition. So now that eye is clean, well, that eye I've just cleaned as good as I can possibly get it. There is still some corrosion on the underside of the glass. I've obviously been able to clean the layer that I can access. Now there's 2 options that I can do now. The first is my preferred option, and I'm just going to compensate with a slightly different capacitor should it prove to overexpose. That's the easiest way of doing it, and it's also the way that's less risky. The second option that I could do is actually desolder this little chip that contains the electric eye, so I can desolder this chip right here, cut the glass out, clean it on both sides, and then glue the glass back in. But that is risky. There is a real risk of damaging either the glass, smashing it completely, or just simply the electric eye being damaged in the process. I have done that before. It is a skill that is in my wheelhouse. However, it's risky. I did it with a client's camera at the end of last year, and his electric eye didn't work once I put it back together again. So over the years, I've lost about 3 electric eyes doing that. So these days, my preference is I always let the client know, and I say, hey, there's 2 ways that I can do this. If I think that it's really going to affect the performance of the eye, and most people are just happy to have it compensated. So effectively for the compensation, it'll just change the capacitor value that we use. So in order to go from a SX-70 film to 600 film, we use a capacitor that's 1/4 the value. If, say, the electric eye is a little bit corroded, we might divide that number by 5 instead. And if it's really corroded, we might divide that number by 6. And then that generally will work fine. But it is a bit of a fine art, 600 conversions. The reason being, these are old analog circuit boards that are 50 years old. And sometimes, even if you get it perfectly right, the solenoid pneumatics have altered a little bit over time because of oxidization. So even if you get everything completely textbook, it's not to say that it's going to work properly. That's what I found while repairing SX-70s. So this is a bit of a dark art. So I've just taken out the original capacitor, and what I'm going to do is find its value. Now this is a green tip, so I believe this is going to be close to 800 picofarads. Polaroid did color code their capacitors. This is a little blue and green job. But I can take the guesswork out of the equation with my little ESR reading machine, which hopefully has charge. If not, I'm just going to have to plug it into my phone charger just off to the side. But I'm going to try and get this on camera. This is basically a ESR reader that I have attached to an SX-70 chassis so that I can power it off of a pack of film. It's kind of novel. There you go, battery has enough charge. And yep, 785 picofarads. So this is basically 800. So if we divide that by 4, that gives us roughly 200. So that's about 180 picofarads. And I'm going to certainly need to compensate for that electric eye a little bit because it's still kind of hazy. So I would say probably if we use something like 150, it's going to work really, really well. So let's see what I have. So I've just got my stash of capacitors here. And I just need to find one that's 150. Here we go. So these are just off-the-shelf, run-of-the-mill ceramic capacitors. I get mine locally because support local. So I literally just go down to my local electronics store and buy these. I much prefer to do that than have to do weird big bulk orders online. And it's nice to support brick and mortar stores because brick and mortar electronic stores are rare to find these days. They are a dying breed. So I like to support them where I can. All right, I just have a tiny little drill bit that I'm going to use to enlarge the holes. Well, not enlarge, but just to remove any glue from the holes where the capacitor is about to go. And I realize my bench is getting a little messy looking, so let's just clear some stuff to the side out of view so it doesn't look like such a pigsty, hey? How's that? A little bit better? So I've just desoldered the old capacitor, I've cleared the holes, now we just need to put the new capacitor in, which is over here. That is a 150. That should work perfectly fine. Now when I go to film test this, should this capacitor still prove to cause overexposure, I will swap it out for a 120. But this one should work fine. All right, let's solder that new capacitor down. And I'll now insulate those two solder points so that they don't short out on the PCB, on the lens board. And to insulate them, I'm going to use Kapton tape. Kapton tape is proper electrical work grade tape. I'm not just using regular sellotape here. Kapton can withstand high temperatures, so it's perfect if you've got like a PCB that's going to be subject to soldering irons, as could very well be the case for this PCB in the future. And of course, it's completely insulated and electronically neutral. so it doesn't conduct electricity. All right, now I can bend the little flash fire legs back over. All right, and then what I like to do is just resolder all the main connections on the PCB because they can get oxidized over time. So it's always good to just apply a bit of fresh solder just to ensure, you know, the shutter is going to trigger and little things like that. So we're nearly done. Nearly done. Now I've just got to reassemble the lens, make sure everything's clean. And then of course comes the fun part, which is reassembling the camera, film testing, and of course making sure that everything is calibrated, like infinity for focus and things like that. So let's grab my cleaning cloth, bring my lamp in. When I edit these videos for the shutter, I may crop it in a little bit tighter. All right, I'm starting to run low on battery here for my camera. So I'm just going to see if I can plug myself in. Using my phone charger. Sorry if it jiggles. Let's see if that gives enough charge just to keep me going. I'll try and keep my eye on things if I suddenly lose the footage. Nearly done. But yeah, I'll try and give maybe like 150% zoom when I edit the video on these smaller, more fiddly parts. I'll try and keep everything centered just to give you guys a bit of a closer idea of what I'm doing. Actually, one thing I am going to do here is use a little bit of lithium grease on the flash cam assembly, just where it slides on that brass washer, the little circlip that holds it down. Interestingly enough, the factory repair manual specifically tells you not to do this, but the reason that they list for not doing it is apparently they had a few repairmen Actually, no, I should say it's not in the official repair manual. It's in the factory bulletins that were sent out later to repairmen. And it's because they had a few repairmen ham-fistedly drop grease onto the shutter blades, which would stick them together and, you know, cause more drama than it was worth. But if you're careful and you apply a bit of lube to that little flash cam follower, that piece there, it really helps smooth out the focusing and just makes the focusing a lot smoother to use. There's a lot less of like a binding sensation when you go between infinity and closer distances. All right. Now, just by eyeball, I can pretty much tell where the infinity location is supposed to be for these lenses, even though they obviously aren't marked at all. I just know from experience where it's going to be close. So I've just set that, and of course, I will point the camera out my window towards infinity and double check that a little later. And that'll be part of what I test before I send it back to the client. But it should be perfect around there. All right, I'm just gonna put the nut back on, and then this basically does it for this shutter. Obviously it needs to be tested. And I need to ensure that film is calibrated properly. I may have to adjust the pneumatic screw in the solenoid, but I won't know until it comes time to test it. In the meantime, probably off camera, I'll just give this viewfinder piece a bit of a clean. It's really spotless though, like there's really no need for me to get in here and take it apart. There's like really no dust anywhere other than on the little eyepiece glass. But sometimes when these, if they've been left in the erect position for a long period of time, they can get very, very dusty, so they need to be cleaned. But this one's looking pretty good. All right. Well, that'll do it for this part of the video. Through the magic of editing though, I will appear very shortly on your screen to finish reassembling the body. All right, it is the next day, everybody. I have moved the camera even closer today to hopefully give you guys a better idea of what it is that I'm doing. So we've got a tighter crop going on, and basically where I left off was waiting for the silicone to dry, where I had to re-glue in the mirror. And really all I've done, the only things I did off camera were just some very boring things. I removed the adhesive residue that was left on the body panels, just because it was sticky, so I used some solvent to do that. And now all I have to do is just remove my fingerprints from this mirror where I had to press it down, and we can reassemble everything. I also off camera just cleaned a little bit of dust out the viewfinder and off of the Fresnel screen. This Fresnel screen was in very good condition. And yeah, really just didn't have any faults at all, so there really wasn't much for me to do. Quite often you'll find that these Fresnel screens end up with fungus on them and they end up quite grubby. Certainly not the case for this one. So really what's going to happen now is the next stage of testing, where basically we're going to reassemble this, give it a film test, and hope that everything is working after putting it back together. And I have no doubt that it will. All right, so I'm pretty much just doing the exact reverse of how I took this thing apart. So I've got my little parts organizer here, and it is just a matter really of reinserting the various pins and screws that hold this together. And then of course we have to resolder the shutter to the body of the camera. So I'm just starting with the hinge pins. I just have to push the mirror up and inside so that the baffle clears the bellows. And now it's basically just a hunt for all the right screws. I don't bother organizing my screws because I know all the different sizes and shapes that Polaroid used. So I just keep them in the same parts tray. But certainly, if you weren't familiar, it would be a better idea to use like an ice cube tray or something like that just to keep them organized. But I know all the various different lengths, so I just keep them all in the same container, really so I can't lose them. All right, clip the bellows in, and now I need to find the very short stubby screws. Now, please let me know which one of the camera angles you like the most, because I've had 3 different heights in this particular video. I was chatting to one of my followers last night, and he suggested having like a secondary camera for close-ups and things like that. I have thought about that in the future. That is something that I may implement in these videos. Certainly it's the case that if I find anything particularly interesting, I'm just going to use my phone and try and zoom in. Like, let's say, for example, I find some gnarly fungus or, some kind of botched repair job or something that's visually interesting. I'll try and do some B-roll footage. But the problem with having a twin camera setup, I've already got to concentrate a lot on keeping this thing in the view, let alone having 2 angles. Certainly it's something that I'll consider in the future. But for now, really I want to try and keep just the editing down as much as I possibly can. Because as you guys can tell from the length of this video, these are time-consuming restorations. It can take a very long time to get an SX-70 up and working. That's not even including things like calibration and solenoid tweaking and the length of time that film testing takes. I won't be showing any of that really boring stuff on camera. For example, no one needs to see me rub metal panels with a cloth for half an hour, getting them clean. Well, unless you guys really do want that, if you want half an hour ASMR of me polishing metal, then sure, I can arrange that. But I'm going to try and basically just keep these edits to the main crux of the restoration. And I really, because of the length of the videos, I'm going to try keep them at 1080p, and certainly I don't want to be editing backwards and forwards for 2 hours doing B-roll. I may upload videos in 4K if I do shorter content. So for example, if I'm doing like a review or a little tip or a trick or something like that, that the video is only going to take about 10 minutes, then I may record them in 4K. But like 2 hours, 3 hours of 4K footage is like ridiculously large in terms of file size. I think already, like, yesterday's videos are about 10 gigabytes just at 1080p using lightweight encoding. So if I do 4K for like hour-long, multiple hours-long streams, it's just going to get ridiculous. So it's not something I can really feasibly do. But certainly with some shorter format videos, I may upload in 4K. But we'll see what happens with the history of this channel going forwards, I guess. Right, one of the things I have to do, there's a little spiral guard. Let me just get some more light here so you can see what I'm talking about. There's a little spiral guard that goes on the ribbon cable that attaches to the body. And quite often these are not installed properly from the factory. And the spiral spring that's supposed to protect, basically what that little spring does is it wraps around the wires and protects them at the point where they flex the most. Which is very important to have because these wires are effectively put under strain every time you open and close the camera. So it's very important that that little metallic guard, the little wire that wraps around them, be installed correctly. And yeah, basically in the factory this thing was crimped closed, but the spring was not in the correct spot. So the spring came free of its little metal clasp, so I'm just correcting that. Pretty common, and I like to fix it whenever I find it, so I've just done that. Let's reassemble this. All right, so I am going to, yeah, that lens is very, very clean. I'm just going to see if I can get any more of those little specks off just before I install this. But yeah, this board is insulated. I've insulated the capacitor. We've done the capacitor swap. We've got no streaks or cleaning marks on the lens. It's looking very, very nice. Great. All right. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to attach the shutter at first, just using probably just 2 screws. It's kind of like when you build a computer, right? You don't necessarily want to put the entire thing together before you test the components. So I like to just make sure it's held in place during the testing process. Because if I do need to access that, you know, let's say hypothetically the capacitor I need to re-swap because it's not exposing properly, then I only need to take out 2 screws instead of 4. So I'll probably just, yeah, keep it held in place with 2 for now, which is more than enough for testing purposes. Well, that's annoying. I just noticed that the latch on this body was actually bent inwards, which is unfortunate. That is all right. I do have spare latches. I can see them right in front of me. Now, that is something that could not possibly have happened like overnight, like the camera just sat there. That must have been loose already and was just on its way to fail. Given how damaged the door was, I'm not surprised. But this video will now include a latch replacement. Not that one. Yeah, that one looks pretty good, but it needs the sticker put on it. That one is broken. Also, here we go. All right, that's an appropriate latch. I will just have to recycle the sticker because these stickers are just coming off. Well, in a way, I'm glad that's happening now because I would much rather that latch break in my hands, where I've got the spares to fix it, than in the hands of the client. But yeah, as I looked into that, as I looked at the body, I thought, huh, that latch looks like really bent. And sure enough, it fell completely off. All right, I'm just gonna salvage a sticker. This is why I keep these busted latches, if they have good quality stickers. There we go. And we're gonna have to glue that onto the new latch. So let's just grab a bit of adhesive. Well, that is too much, clearly. Grab the new sticker. This is very fiddly work. There we go. Sorry if my hands are going off screen, guys. It's very fiddly work that I'm doing here. But basically what I did, I just glued the sticker back on the side of that latch. This latch that I had is a really good replacement, but it was missing its sticker. Sometimes the stickers just peel off because the adhesive, it just loses its strength over the years. All right, well that was a fun little detour. Now we still have to swap the latch out. So in order to do that, the screw containing the latch must be removed. And then the one below it must be loosened. And yeah, we basically just got to pop it out now. Now you have to be very careful doing this so that you don't accidentally desynchronize the entire gear train assembly. This is far and away the single most common thing that I see people attempt as a DIY repair and screw things up. So what I've just done there is make it look very, very easy. But yeah, over the years, this is without a doubt the number one thing that clients screw up when they attempt DIY repair. I've seen this brick clients' cameras more than anything else. And the truth of the matter is, to replace the latch, you don't really need to take it apart all that much. But every now and again, yeah, you will desynchronize something, and you may end up needing to rebuild the gear train. All right, I'm just gonna click pick arm retention back into place, and yeah, just basically make sure all those screws are tightened. This latch just, a lot of these early Model 1 cameras, the latches were made of quite a cheap pot set metal, and they just break. It is rather rare for it to actually break at the rear, where this one did. Like, that is certainly more unusual. Usually it's this little pin at the front where it's like a little T-shape. Usually that's the bit that breaks off. Certainly more rare for it to break at the end. I would say whatever damaged this thing, and caused the door to break. Probably also damaged that little latch as well, but that's all right. I'm going to assume that someone is at the door, probably the postman, because Luna has just got up. Hi, Luna. And she can hear our other dog, Lara, who's a German Shepherd. She always barks at the door, so if you guys can hear some doggy commotion going on, that would be why. But it's just the postman. It's all right, Luna. The postman will leave us a package, and then everything will settle down. All right, so now it is time to resolder the side ribbon cable. So I like to line everything up first. Let's turn the soldering iron on. Yep, Lara has stopped barking, so Luna is now no longer interested. Alright, so first step is to line up all the little cables, because they usually get a little bit bent when they're coming off the camera. Yep, that's all in place. Now soldering these, certainly it's harder to solder these original Model 1 wires. They changed the ribbon cable design in the later Alpha and Sonar cameras so that it was just sort of flat pads to pads, much easier to solder. These little wires can become tricky. The key when you're soldering them is to not press too hard so as to deform and flatten and smush them. To make things easier, you can use a little bit of flux. It's not entirely necessary. You can get away without it. I like to use it just because it makes this bit in particular just that little bit easier. So I'm just putting a little bit of flux on those pads just to make my life easier. And we'll line everything up. Now I haven't added any solder to this yet. We're basically just using the solder that was already there. And I've got the light source nice and close, so hopefully you guys can see exactly what it is that I'm doing. I usually like to be a little bit closer to the solder than what I am now. I like to have my head directly above it so I can see. But there's a camera in the way because I'm recording. So I'm going to do my best to do that at a distance away. So now that is perfectly good. All those little leads are stuck down nicely. I like to go in and then add a bit of extra brand new solder, just as a real insurance policy. And then just using a screwdriver to hold down the end. Make sure all the leads are pressed into place. There we go. Now, you guys should be able to see what I mean about the quality of your solder mattering a lot. Hopefully it shows up on camera, but these are really, I call them little chrome teeth. And basically, if it doesn't look like little shiny blobs of chrome, then the solder that you're using is likely very poor quality. As I said earlier in the video, I use Cardus audiophile grade solder. It's incredibly high purity. It contains lead. It is designed for wiring up high-end amplifiers and hi-fi systems and turntables and that kind of stuff. I like it because of its high lead content. It makes it very easy to work with. It is very expensive, but with that said, like a quarter pound of this stuff lasts me years, right? So solder is not something you use a lot of. So cost per use, it's really not that expensive. And as I said earlier in the video, the reason that I use this stuff is every now and again I will refurbish a turntable or a record player or an amplifier or something. And it does just really help show that you know what you're talking about when you mention Cardus as a brand. People that are in the audiophile community will know exactly what you're talking about. Is some of it snake oil? Probably, but I just really like them as a brand. Cardus, if you're watching and you want to sponsor me, let me know. I like your products. All right, the other thing that I did off camera, you guys would remember that this door was completely busted. I've gone ahead and got a replacement set of rollers. These rollers, I believe, were from an SX-70 Sonar. And they are, they've replaced the original busted ones. So effectively, we're all installed. I have to put the shutter housing back on. Just clips in place like so. I won't put the bottom panel on just yet. I'll just put the door on and then we'll grab a pack of film. Now, because I've been playing with the motor and stuff, it may not run nicely the first time, so I might need to cycle this a few times, but let's see what happens. There we go. So as we can see, it's responding to light as it should. Everything there is working really nicely. Let's just put in a pack of film again, and I'll stick my flash tester in. Oh yeah, this pack of film has much better battery. We'll cover the electric eye so that it thinks it's dark. And there we go. Great. And then what I'm going to do, I'm just going to have the camera facing me with a bit of light so I can see what the flash aperture is doing. Yep, and that looks accurate in terms of the aperture shape. So that means I am very happy with this camera. Really all that we need to do now is film test it, and of course put the leather panels on. One thing that I'm going to do just before I box it up, I will put a bit of Kapton tape over where I've soldered here, just over where those where the shutter cable meets the body. Now the reason for doing this is really twofold. The first reason, it does add a little bit of extra insulation, which is always nice to have. But the second thing, it keeps all those cables held down to the body, which is really nice when you go to put the body panel back on. It doesn't get caught on anything, which allows you to just click everything into place. I'll put the gear train cover on, but before I do that, actually, I just want to add a little bit of lithium grease to the pick arm, because I didn't get the chance to do it yesterday. I will just do that right now. So just a little bit of white lithium grease on the pick arm, mainly on those rails where it slides. Effectively, that noise, that clicking sound, is the pick arm traveling backwards and forwards, and that's the noise that you want to be hearing. If you're not hearing that noise, it indicates that the pick arm is sticking. Now, that technically doesn't cause any major dramas, but if the pick arm sticks too much, it can result in your film not being picked up properly, which can end up stuffing with the camera's cycling. It might then pick up 2 images the next time around, or miss picking up an image. It's just not ideal. All right. Brilliant. Well, I think this thing turned out remarkably clean looking. What I'm going to do is go and film test this thing now. And then once I can confirm that it's all working and all calibrated nicely, I'll put the new leather panels on. My client actually supplied the leather panels himself. So I believe he used Hugo Studio for the leather. I recognize the finish and the texture as being from Hugo Studio. So he's a leather producer from America. I generally go with Aki Asahi, who's based in Japan, just for the personal preference that I've dealt with Aki for years and I think his leather is really good quality. These are okay though. These are perfectly serviceable and match the original color scheme really well. So I'm going to go test this thing. I'm going to come back with hopefully a nice sample shot of outdoors with a bit of blue sky. And I'm going to use a little reference Polaroid that I have. This was taken with my SX-70R, which is a brand new PCB. I'll be doing a video on that in the future, so keep your eyes peeled. But effectively, this is a brand new digital PCB with optional manual controls. So I know that this is perfect. So I'm going to use this as a reference. And basically, if this SX-70 can take a photo that looks like this, I'll know we're in business. All right, I'll be back. The camera is looking a little different. I took the liberty of applying my client's new skin to the camera while I was waiting for the film to develop. And I think it looks pretty darn good. It looks brand new. As for the performance of the camera itself, I ended up swapping out the 150 picofarad capacitor with a 120 unit because it just overexposed ever so slightly. But now I'm very happy with the results. Here is a shot from the balcony, demonstrating its ability to produce very nice clear blue skies on a bright sunny day. We then have a photo indoors, handheld of course, because well, this camera now takes 600 speed film, which is much easier to use in low light environments. And then of course, we have a photo taken with flash, testing out the flash socket using my Mint flash bar. Very happy with the performance, very happy with how the camera ended up, and very happy with this demonstration of what it takes to completely overhaul a Polaroid SX-70 Model 1. If you enjoyed this video, let me know. If you would like to see other topics on Polaroids and have some ideas for me, please feel free to write a comment below. And if you have any questions that you'd like me to answer in the next video, please feel free to do so. Effectively, this channel is still in its infancy, so I'm still finding my groove and my way around, but I do hope that you guys are enjoying the repair content. I do have some rough plans on some slightly different format of videos, doing some reviews, doing some information videos, a little bit of history, but I think for the most part, it will be me tearing down and repairing cameras, showing just what it takes to get these things working to a good high standard. Everything that I've showed in this video today, as I said before, I would consider pretty much the bare minimum for a camera to be considered overhauled and refurbished properly. Simply reskinning it isn't good enough. You have to dive deeper than that, and so whatever technician you choose, make sure that they're taking the extra steps to preemptively fix everything on one of these that can go wrong, and make sure that they're doing everything possible to make sure that your images end up like this. Nicely exposed. No need to mess with compensation. These were all shot in the middle, because that's just how it should be if the camera is calibrated properly. Yeah, and I would just like to end the video by saying thanks for watching. If you have a camera that you'd like me to repair, feel free to send it in. All of my contact information is listed below, and I'd love to work on whatever Polaroid you might have. You can follow me on my social media account. I'm on Facebook and I'm on Instagram as the Instant Camera Guy, so you can find me over there. And yeah, who knows? One of your cameras may end up in one of my videos. Provided that it's interesting enough, I'll probably record it and stick it online. Anyway, I'm going to contact my client and let him know that I'm very happy with how his camera's turned out. And I'm going to get back to work and repair some more stuff because my day is not even close to being complete yet. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Until then.